Hey guys, Ed Pizza here with the Miles to Go podcast. Just want to give you a quick overview on what you're about to see. There's a lot of planning that goes into producing our podcast episodes on a weekly basis, and definitely a good amount of post-production. And, it's one of those things where I always find it best when I don't work with a script, which is why it's, always great to have a co-host like Richard to help keep the conversation going. Well, today we're doing something a little bit different, so just want to go ahead and apologize in advance, explain to you what you're going to see if it's not quite what you were expecting to see. But we want to bring you breaking news, and there was breaking news today that came out from Hyatt about the Mr. and Mrs. Smith integration. You guys know we love Hyatt here. So I want to make sure we brought you some quick updates on what that's going to look like. With this sort of stuff, there's time involved and there's cost involved, and I'm really thankful for Thrifty Traveler being a sponsor of the show right now. It gives us some flexibility to be able to push out extra content that I think can be helpful for folks to wrap their arms around and make sure they're getting the best use of their points and miles. So if you haven't taken a look at Thrifty Traveler yet, you'll see stuff in the show notes about how you can sign up with them. We've got our own code, GO10, that'll get you $10 off an annual subscription. At any rate, what you're about to see is a quick 15-minute video. Hey, here's my first look at Mr. and Mrs. Smith. It's a single take without a whole lot of planning, just a little bit of research before we hit the button. So love to hear your feedback on the format once you've had a chance to look at it. And I'm going to shut up and get out of the way. Let me know what you guys think. Hey guys, welcome back to an abbreviated version of the Miles to Go podcast, which we are affectionately labeling right now Miles in a Minute. Though we won't be a minute, probably be 10 to 15. Back in the day, I used to do a short news podcast on a daily basis called Now Boarding. That went the way of the dodo bird a number of years ago, but been trying to find a way to bring back breaking news to the podcast feed. And since time permitted and Jeremiah was on our side being able to do some quick post-production, we're pumping out video and audio today, even though we've already dropped an episode earlier today. So this is going to be all about the Mr. and Mrs. Smith integration with Hyatt hotels. For folks who have been paying attention along the way, you know that Hyatt lost their partnership with SLH. We talked a little bit about that on the most recent episode, but they're gaining the Mr. and Mrs. Smith partnership, which used to be a part of IHG. And there actually is some overlap between Mr. and Mrs. Smith and SLH. These are special, one-of-a-kind properties. They're not managed directly by Mr. and Mrs. Smith. It's a curated collection. I had a chance to talk to the founder of Mr. and Mrs. Smith along with some Hyatt execs last week to get a better idea of what the integration looked like. Well, the big key that we're waiting for was to see what the actual properties would look like from a pricing standpoint in miles and points, because we are, at our hearts, points, miles, nerds. This is a brief look. I picked 3 properties out just to sort of dig into what you can expect to see. Obviously, a lot more to come, still a bunch of properties to be integrated, so this is meant to be a first look, not a definitive look. But for those that aren't familiar, just a quick read down of what the partnership looks like. So if you are an existing Hyatt member, there are some benefits, but maybe not all the ones that you're used to. So you'll earn your 5 base points per dollar spent at any Mr. and Mrs. Smith property that is integrated at this point. You'll also earn your bonus tiers based on if you're an elite member, and you get stay credits. You also earn towards the Brand Explorer Awards, which can be a great way to get a free night. As far as things like suite upgrades and breakfast benefits, those are going to be based on availability, and this is absolutely going to vary by property, because you have some really dynamic hotels that are part of the program that don't fit in the neat little box of categories. As well, there won't be a defined breakfast benefit to start for globalists, again, because the properties are very unique. A lot of the Mr. and Mrs. Smith bookings have amenities included, packages, spa, all sorts of things that are specific to those properties. I think one of the other things to note, and we call this out in the episode that will drop next week, but Hyatt was also very, very detailed when they pointed out that even though these properties have some level of a dynamic award redemption feel to them, that this isn't a change to Hyatt's philosophy, that they still believe in the award charts that they have for both the regular suite of hotels, if you will, and then the all-inclusive charts. So this isn't a reimagining of the brand. It's just that the Mr. and Mrs. Smith collection is very different. Some people love this. Some people will hate it. We just want to make sure that we give you the most accurate information. As a Hyatt fan, I can say that some of the prices I looked at were definitely high in terms of the number of points, but there were also some properties that A, I thought were affordable, and B, were properties that there's just no way you would have been able to book on your own. Let's dig in a little bit to what that looks like. So Hyatt has not integrated all the Mr. and Mrs. Smith properties yet, but they have focused on places that most people are likely to go. Just because I'm crazy enough to visit 5 countries in one day and hop to the Faroe Islands for 48 hours doesn't mean the typical consumer will. So if looking on the screen right now, what you'll see is a map of the U.S., Latin America, and then a little bit of South America. What was cut off in the dots, and we'll get to in just a second, was also the Azores, which is a place that I visited probably 5 or 6 years ago. Absolutely loved my time there. But as you can see from the map, lots of dots in places that we're familiar with, a bunch of states across the country. Definitely some dots in some Latin American and South American places that we don't see on the map today. So this is an expansion of the Hyatt map as we've come to see it. And if you're listening in, you can go to the Hyatt website. There should be a banner for Mr. and Miss Smith there that you can click on. We'll also include a link to that in the show notes, so you can get a chance to see what this map looks like. Hyatt does plan to integrate more properties further down the road. This is just the first batch. I picked 3 hotels to break down, and they're all, I think, within the wheel well of what somebody might consider booking. So first up is the Octant Furnace, and this property was called the Furnace Hotel when I visited in 2018. I actually redeemed Marriott Bonvoy points back then. Good gosh, it could have even been leftover SPG points based on when this was. At any rate, this property, Furnace, is named in the Azores for the fact that the whole area is one big, massive hot springs. There's some interesting restaurants in the area where you can actually dine with your meal being made in the ground. So you book ahead of time, and they plant stews in the ground where the springs are, and essentially cook your lunch or dinner using the springs. Octant Furnace is a spa-ish sort of property. Hot springs there, ice baths, spa treatments, all that sort of stuff. Doesn't appear to be a member of the Marriott program any longer, so can't redeem points that way. But Hyatt now does give you that option. There are a handful of flights from the U.S., some from Canada, that get you to the Azores. But a popular way to get to the Azores is to hop over to Lisbon or Porto in Portugal, and then to connect in to say, Ponta Delgada in the Azores. So if we look at this property specifically, for the date ranges that I looked at, I found property pricing, and again, there's some currency conversion here, but I found pricing in the neighborhood of, call it like the low to mid 300s per night, so call it $325 to $350. You've got your taxes and fees on top of that, so you're looking at a landed cost of somewhere between, let's call it $325 and $400 for the range that I searched. And when I found award rooms available, either a standard double or a twin, as you can see on the screen, they were 27,000 Hyatt points per night. Where does that put you in terms of dollars per point or cents per point? It's in that range from, call it 1.25 cents to 1.5 to 1.6 cents, depending on how many fees the properties have. I did find a number of different fee schedules, and we're not 100% certain how all of these will work out to the penny, but I think I'm making a reasonable approximation of what you could grab a room for here on points. When I stayed here a number of years ago, breakfast was included. It wasn't immediately clear to me whether breakfast was an included benefit on all of these rates, so definitely an open question there. But for me, a property that I really enjoyed staying at, Hyatt did not have this dot on their map before the Mr. and Mrs. Smith integration, nor did really any of the major hotel brands. So this really does expand the map. Is this a good value or a good use of your points? I think it's decent. It's certainly not the best that you could do, but again, for a place in time and a dot that didn't used to be on the map, I loved my time in the Azores, and I think this gives you a way to save up your points and stay in what I consider to be a fairly undiscovered, lush, fun country to visit. Next up, we took a spin down to Barbados, another place that I've visited over the years. The Barbados is, I wouldn't say quintessential Caribbean, but definitely laid back Caribbean style. A bunch of cruise ships that stop there, a bunch of all-inclusive sort of vacations, and the property has some very interesting rooms that I took a look at. Some rooms that open up out in gardens, definitely some colorful island motifs in the rooms, and what looked to be a fairly well-reviewed property. I had not heard of this property before and haven't stayed there, but it's called the Cobblers Cove in Barbados. I saw a bunch of different ranges in terms of price per points. And I would say this is, on the upper range of what I looked at. And this room is what they call the upper circle suite, 560 square foot room. So a pretty decent sized room with a very private terrace overlooking some of these lush gardens at the property. And it's 65,000 points a night. And so a lot of folks are probably saying, well, gosh, Ed, this is, way more than I'd want to spend, with my Hyatt points. And that might be right. Be clear, like I didn't want to put out all of the cheapest properties I could find. I want to make sure that there was a variety to show you guys here in this first sort of like pass at what we're looking at with Mr. and Mrs. Smith. So you've got to definitely figure out 65,000 points a night worth it for you. I did find nights that were a little bit cheaper than this. I found nights that were more expensive than this for the same room that were, 80,000 points a night. This comes down to how you're going to travel. There are a bunch of folks that in the miles and points community that like to use the phrase, chase the fare, not the destination. So we find cheap flights or cheap hotel rooms when we go places where we can get the most bang for our buck. But for folks that are bound to a school schedule, like our family is, you're likely going at peak times and those prices are going to be higher. So you've got some decisions to make as to what you think is the best value, but just trying to give you a sense of what I think the Mr. and Mrs. Smith partnership is going to look like and help you set some expectations. Last property I looked at, and just regrouping real quick on Barbados, same like cents per point range, if you will, as the Octant Furnace, in terms of how the rates slide up and down. So, a 60,000 point night, you're going to be in that, call it, $800 range, for a night at that property. Last property I looked at was the Bluebird in Lake Placid. Lake Placid is, really awesome area for, fall leaf color changes in New York, skiing, obviously lots of lakes up that way. As a native New Yorker, Saratoga Springs, Lake Placid, these were all areas that New Yorkers would vacation at various times a year. So, definitely a different feel in the summer than in the winter at some of these places, and snow is no joke in once you get up into these areas of New York. Lake Placid, famously hosting the Olympics, when I was just a little kid. This property looks somewhere in between this, feel for, hey, they're shooting for a little bit of a rustic motif, but definitely looks very luxurious, very boutique-y. And, the rates are what I would consider to be reasonable. Now, I picked a random weekend in December, probably a pretty good chance you're going to have some snow on the ground then. I would imagine that, on some of the key dates during, what I would call leaf peeping season, the hotel was sold out. I would imagine that rates get pretty high here in those peak dates. So definitely going to require more points per night, if you will. But for this example, for a weekend stay in December, which, again, as a New Yorker, if you like a little bit of snow on the ground, don't mind a little bit of crisp air, this could be a fun time to visit a property like this. This is a 27,000 point per night award. The room is 900 square feet, so definitely big, a lot of space to move around in. You're not in a shoebox, if you will. The pictures, like I said, on the property, all the rooms look very nice. A little bit of a rustic feel, but definitely look very comfortable. Property is also well reviewed. And I think, even the biggest skeptics about how the Mr. and Mrs. Smith partnership would work out would say that a 27,000 point night option, somewhere in upstate New York, which can be a beautiful place to stay, all year round, is really not a bad option to have added to the Hyatt program. And I know I am mostly a Hyatt optimist, but, again, I think you've got to think about this partnership a little bit differently. Maybe it's not a fit for you, but at the end of the day, could you find a quote unquote better value of price per point? Sure, absolutely. But I don't think that's all there is to the world of miles and points. I think the more I talk to people who are colleagues, fellow business folks, family, stuff like that, they're not always looking for the absolute rock bottom best deal they can find. They're looking for a great place to take their family, and they want to be able to save up their points and do something fun with them. And I think that the Bluebird Lake Placid is a great example of that kind of property that just doesn't exist in the Hyatt brand right now. And frankly, there aren't a lot of properties like this in either Marriott or Hilton at the moment either. There are some, but not a ton. As far as the rest of it, if you will, I spent another, call it half hour sort of digging around, found a bunch of properties that look awesome, lodges and Crested Butte, beautiful properties in Wyoming, other stuff in the Caribbean and Latin America. As you'd imagine, I found a full mixed bag. I found a bunch of properties that didn't have award availability. I found properties that were 200,000 points a night for a 3-bedroom lodge. It was all over the board. So this is absolutely going to be one of those your mileage may vary sort of things. But I think what we've shown here with these 3 properties that we took a look at is that, first and foremost, there are ways to use points that can be to your advantage. It absolutely does open up the map and also opens up the type of properties you can use your Hyatt points for. And then if you're on the cash side of things and you've got a trip planned and you're willing to spend money, well, you've got some options there in terms of being able to earn points in the Hyatt program that could be beneficial to boost your balance for whatever your next booked vacation is going to be. Still trying to sort out all the benefits that elite folks will get, which are obviously important to me and my family, but I think that's definitely going to be a work in progress with the Mr. and Mrs. Smith program. Like I said, new format for us. Definitely not something we're going to do every week, but on some of this breaking news stuff, the news broke today, Wednesday, and we don't have another show to publish until next Wednesday. And Richard and I will absolutely discuss this in detail, but felt like a good opportunity to work with Jeremiah, push out a quick episode so folks could see a little bit of what I'm seeing, get my opinions, and also offer yours. If you think I'm an idiot for my opinion, I hope you'll let me know. But I'd love to hear what your thoughts are, at this first look at the Mr. and Mrs. Smith integration. As we say at the close of every episode, until we upload again, we've got miles to go.